Thank you very much for showing up, for hanging in. Last session of the day. Appreciate that. My name is Tobias Komischke. The presentation topic today is about the role of UX in maybe your organization, maybe in your team, maybe in your development process. A little bit about myself. I'm the Director of User Experience at Infogistics Services. I studied all that UX stuff, and I've been working now, it's actually more closer to 15 years, but I really feel old when I say that. I've been working in UX in research, in development, in all kinds of consulting. And those who have seen talks of me in previous Software Architects and Dev Week presentations know that slide here. That's the first one I've ever seen when I went to college. And back then we called the thing usability engineering, not user experience. But that's kind of like still reflective of what we try to do, which is trying to avoid situations where there's a user not having any clue about where he or she is in a UI, where he or she came from, and what can be done next. But on another level, this could also be the UX person and the developer, or the other way around. And that's a little bit about what I want to talk about today. It's not meant to be an advertisement for UX. I think that's really not necessary anymore. I will tell you why. We've been doing this 10, 15 years ago, trying to explain to people what UX is and why it's important. We are far beyond that. So what I want to do is just briefly say what, to me, user experience is, since there's so many different definitions about it. I want to say why you, as people in the software development arena, should care about this, whether you're a software architect, whether you're a developer. Why it can be hard to include UX into not only the organization, your team, but also into a development or lifecycle management process. And then shed some light on the worldview of those UX professionals, those people that you may encounter when working on projects that include UX. And that involves looking briefly at processes. And then lastly, talking about those UX roles, what roles work in that field, what roles will be helpful for you, how you can determine if somebody has a good skill set or background to do the job, what kind of backgrounds they should have. So in other words, just trying to bring that world of UX closer to you. But let me ask you, who of you would consider himself or herself a software architect? Don't be so shy. Okay, good. After all, this is software architect. But I know from Dev Week that it blends heavily. Who is not either a developer or a software architect? Who are you? What are you? Okay, fair. And you? Okay, good, perfect. Perfect audience. I think for you two also, I hope this will be informative. So let's start by asking the question, what is UX anyways? Because there's so many definitions, more than stars in the sky. I personally really like this one here. UX is the envisioned, expected, or actual experience of a user interacting with a technical product. And I like it because it includes the envisioned experience, not only the actual one. The actual one, yeah, you can access that, but it's after the fact. Envisioned means that you have that in front of your head when you design, because you want to understand what the projected experience will be. So the sooner you start to think about it, the better the result. Now, other definitions, like from ISO, they go beyond the technical product, and they also include things like services. And I tend to shy away from that because it makes things very, very arbitrary. Because if you call into a call center and you have the feeling that the person who's picking up that phone is really unfriendly or not knowledgeable or speaks in a very bad dialect like I do, what does it have to do with user experience? To me, that's customer experience. Maybe it's brand experience. But user experience, where it came from, should be really targeting a technical system. But the bottom line is that it doesn't matter if you design for it, if you care about it, if you invest in it, there will always be a user experience. And so on the two extremes of the spectrum, you have beautiful people having super much fun interacting and engaging with the product. Or on the other side, you have a person who is really not very happy and is angry and would consider your product at least suboptimum. And so you can shape that experience. It's not blue box and wonder and magic. You can shape that experience. And so UX design is all about preemptively shaping the experience that a user will have once the product is actually released and deployed. And by the way, interrupt me at any moment if you have questions or annotations or war stories. I like war stories. So why should you care personally? I'm sure that you all heard about UX, and probably you have maybe already UX practices experienced in your company, or you heard it from friends or colleagues. In my mind, why you should care is because if you are a software architect, you are the lead technical guy, and not only in your organization, but also technically in your development projects. And that comes with added responsibility. Added responsibility as in you are the guy to make sure that you deliver the right thing the right way, but also oftentimes, even though you may have project managers, it's up to you to manage the crowd, to get the staff together and delegate things and bring the development to fruition. As a developer, you are the person who directly interacts with UX artifacts. Now, those artifacts may be generated not even by UX professionals, by somebody else, but still you're the person who has to inherit those artifacts and has to build upon those artifacts. And so if you have UX people that come in as UX people, and it's just not a stretch goal for a developer to cover the user experience, you will find that those UX people can make your life really, really easy, and that's what they are for. Unfortunately, they also can make your life a little bit miserable, and I'll talk a little bit about why this is and what can be done about it. And just to know that UX people have a very different background. They are different from developers, and that's not per se a problem. That's the big chance, because the way it should work is complementary. That's why I threw in this yin-yang sign here. It should be complementary, with the clear goal to advance the product, and by that also the experience and its success, way beyond what you as a developer would do alone. Same way as the UX person alone cannot do anything either, because what they put out there are artifacts in PowerPoint and UI specs, but somebody has to build it too. So it is truly complementary. And so the reason why you may experience in your organization the need for UX may not come from yourselves. It may be actually coming from the top down, where management, executive level people will mandate that we have to do UX now. They may not even know what they talk about or what UX actually means, but they have heard a lot of things. I'll just go through some of the things that they may have heard just for your understanding and reference. The reason why today we don't have to sell UX anymore is that it's right now really clearly understood that if you look at maturity of technology over time, and time here is the x-axis, there's a certain threshold where there are needs that are at the beginning of a technology life cycle and lifespan unfulfilled. So there's a need. Technology is not there yet. The need basically says, I wish I could do X, Y, and Z. As the technology matures, you actually reach that threshold. But what happens after that? After that, you have actually excess quality, because the technology provides what it should. It's good enough. But what now? What else? Now you talk about other attributes, exciter attributes, quality attributes that a product also has to have, that in turn then may actually end up as more important for a purchasing decision, for example, than the pure technical capabilities. And the classic example, obviously, and you may have heard this 1,000 times before, is the car. The car at the beginning of the 20th century up to the 30s, early 40s, were like really cranky, high complicated machines. Even starting a car was not trivial. The maintenance of a car was horrible. Today, you can buy any car you want. It doesn't matter, small car or French cars or American cars. Really doesn't matter. They all work rather well. So how do you decide as a consumer what car you buy? It's not about horsepowers anymore for the most people. If you're a geek, yes. But most people, they make their purchasing decision on things like number of cup holders and the color and the form and shape of the car. And it's kind of like what this is trying to do. And again, I show you this because that's the stuff that they show at the C-level conferences. CIO conferences, that's what they talk about. This is where your guys, your management level, gets the idea to do more UX. And then they also see these kind of informations. Microsoft came up with a new blue, and here's the hex code. You can all become rich. Just copy that hex code. And they changed their hyperlinks into that kind of blue, and 1 second later, they made $80 million in additional advertisement revenue because people that went on those websites felt more confident and comfortable to click on this blue than the other blue that had before. So don't ask me whoever measured this and how this actually could have happened, but this is the stuff that the C-level people talk about. This is for them what UX is, and that's the reason why they say for your next development project, we need to have UX. They don't know what that actually means, but UX is important. But also you can ask yourself, as a developer or a software architect, what does it actually mean for your life? Would it change anything you have done before? It doesn't, right? It's just a freaking other color. It doesn't impact you at all. The other examples, I'll show you where it does touch you. This is an example that I experienced myself. So that's one of my war stories, talking with a quite sizable company. They have 45,000 employees. They have 3 architects in the whole company, spread around the world. And one of them told me, we have an intranet that 30,000 out of our 45,000 people use. And one day, we just changed a label on a button on the main menu of the intranet. They had like 7, 8 menu items with buttons on top. The only thing they did was they changed one label. And within 2 days, they had 7,000 complaint tickets. People were completely confused. They couldn't find their information. All hell broke loose. They didn't know what hit them. And they said, we just changed the label. It still does the same. It looks the same. It's the same position. Everything is the same. We just changed the label. How come people don't understand it anymore? And so that is another reason why doing things, and I'll go into more detail on that one, like gathering empirical data about design, such as usability testing, is relevant, just to avoid these kind of things. And again, to what extent does that affect you as a software architect? Not really. You as a developer? Not really. This is input that would be brought to you by UX persons, and it really doesn't make your life any miserable. JD Power and Associates is a company that does market research, and they are very important for the car manufacturing industry. They do all the rankings. And they dropped Ford from a very comfortable 5th place in their rankings to 27, which is really like beyond zero, because their car infotainment system that also had the car navigation was very hard to use. And said, okay, again, the car does what it does. The Ford drives as well as a Hyundai. But the whole package impacts now the user experience, and by that ranking. So again, stuff that's shown at CIO conferences scares the heck out of people. Just some more, here some redesign was done on a banking software, which then resulted in an additional 5 seconds that the tellers had to do while doing a transaction. You sum this all up, over the time and over the users, and all of a sudden you have lost productivity north of $1.5 million. McAfee UI redesign saved 90% in support costs. It's impressive. And why is that? Because the UI is self-explicit, self-descriptive enough so that people don't have to call call centers and ask, I don't understand this one button anymore where you change the label. But decreasing that support cost by 90%, it's a pretty good number. IBM, they had planned on an ROI of 1 to 10 for usability testing. Turned out it was 1 to 100. That's very much in line with data that we had more than 15 years ago. It was the same result, not from IBM. Software refresh took training down from 2 weeks to 2 days. Again, there's a dollar sign or a pound sign behind this. You can calculate what that means for your operational efficiency. So those C-level people, they dig that. And we just had a project that pretty much achieved the same results, like an order of magnitude reduced training effort. It's awesome. And so looking at the numbers, in 2013, $1 trillion will be spent on IT. Up to 15% of those projects that are started will never be ended and finalized. They will just be abandoned because you are on the wrong way, or you realize that you developed the wrong thing for the wrong target audience, or for what other reasons there are. Those 95 to 85% that actually delivered and finalized, a lot of them will be late. Okay, we know all that. It's really hard to mitigate that one. 40 to 50% of the time spent on the software development is rework. So that bears the question, and why is that? What rework? So for that, UX also has an answer. And 55% average is spent on the UI itself. So all this is shown at conferences where all these superhero managers go. And then those superhero managers come back and say, we have to be more competitive, and from now on, you will all do UX in your projects. And that's pretty much all they say. Then it's up to you to really understand what that means. Just 2 more Snapple facts. ISO, and I'm always happy to be in Europe when I talk about this, because nobody cares about ISO standards in the US. But ISO have this 9241 series. It's a bunch of 10, 15 sub-standards under 9241. And it defines UX from top to bottom, right to left. Everything you can think about it. To an extent that local governments in countries adopted that standard and its principles and definitions and methods that define UX and turn it into national law. So as much as I know, you could sue your employer in the UK if you can prove that they violated the design principles of 9241. You could do that. You cannot do this in the US, but from what I know, you can this in the UK. So it's quite interesting that ISO has that kind of definition. And what they are basically saying is a human-centered or user-centered design, which revolves around the needs and the capabilities and the limitations of users, are those that are easier to understand, whereby costs for support and training are reduced. Reduction of cost, check. They diminish impairments and stress for the users and improve their satisfaction. Typically sounds a little bit esoteric. It's like, okay, people are a little bit happier. What do I care? But there are studies that show that user motivation and satisfaction internally has an impact on the bottom line of an organization. They improve the productivity of users and the operating efficiency. Okay. And they improve the quality and the efficiency of products and can affect competitive advantages. So that's, in the end, where everybody is looking at, because it is about competitive advantages. Even if you have an internal system that nobody ever outside your company will see, you're still in competition with the other company that does the same stuff that you have and that may have other internal systems. And then this year, Forrester, I'm not sure if you have this or you know this in the UK. It's a big market research company in the US. Together with Gartner, they're like the top 2. And what they say is law. When they put out a new analysis on iPhone sales or whatever, you see this all over the place. So what they say, people take really, really serious. And they publish a lot about UX nowadays. And they say, what everybody else is saying, it's really important. But they also say that in relation to development teams and how does development organizations handle UX and what do they do maybe in a suboptimum way, they treat design as merely a required document in the process. So kind of like, yeah, well, we have to do user acceptance in the end, so yeah, check. Valuing process more than design. Focusing on only a few aspects of design, preferably those that you're most familiar with or that are very easy or cheap to carry out. Maybe people heard about usability testing, so let's do usability testing right at the end before we deploy. Obviously, it doesn't make any sense, but carrying out usability testing is rather easy. Tasking the wrong people with design for many different reasons. I'll talk about this in a second. Confusing design with the architecture, and they are related, these two, because what typically happens is that another developer is tasked with handling the user experience. It's like, hey, Gary, you do the user experience. Gary says, I'm a database architect. Okay, Tom, you do it. You're a front-end developer. You do UX. I said, I don't know anything about UX. And by the way, I'm super busy with my actual work. Okay. Selecting the wrong design patterns. That's just a knowledge thing. And this year, I'm sure you all have been known for 2 decades. But only with like Forrester and those people that are a little bit on the sidelines of the IT community, it really became known out there that the cost of changes grow very, very fast with the development lifecycle. So the cost to make a change during design and architecture is factor 1. In implementation, it's already 5. And then after deployment or release, it's 30 plus, which is the reason why 80% of all costs are accrued in the commercialization phase of a product and not earlier. But that basically means you want to be sure that you're doing the right thing very, very early on, building the right thing the right way. And so knowing all this and knowing that, yes, there's compelling reasons and people say we need UX now, I always feel that a lot of organizations have very hard time to actually live UX. They all know that it's important and they may read blogs and books, but to make it really sustainable and repeatable is really hard. And that may be due to lack of knowledge. It's like, what do we have to do? What concretely? I know it's important, but what is it that we have to do? Of all the things I can do, what should I do? How do I do this? What are the methods, the techniques, and what are the processes that I can use? When should I use this? Going back to the last slide about the factors that show the impact of changes, when should I do things? At the beginning, at the end, in the middle, throughout? Who is supposed to do this? Is it Gary? Is it Tom? Do we need own resources? Where do we get those resources from? So it's all those questions. The only questions that's not asked is why. The why has been 10, 15 years ago. Lack of resources is a big topic. So like Forrester found out, oftentimes developers are tasked with making sure that the product is really highly usable and looking really great, professional and attractive. And it's really independent from the size of the company. Like the largest companies on earth, you would talk with them because they're so decentralized, and they would say, it's like, I know we should do UX and we try to do UX, but there's only so much money we have, so our devs have to handle it. And then I ask, okay, so where do your devs get that knowledge from? And they say, they read the books. We have a list of blogs on the internet. They just have to do that. And it's not impossible to do that, obviously. But then when I talk with the devs, they say, I'm actually really interested in UX. I have nothing against UX. I would like to do all that stuff. But I'm super busy actually doing my real work, which is like the front-end design, if it's a front-end developer. Or, I'm the middle-tier guy. I actually have other stuff to do, and it's really complicated stuff. I actually don't have the time. I don't have the nerves. Obviously, I don't have the background, because when you study computer science, you don't learn that stuff. And then the third one here is lack of buy-in. So yes, if your senior management mandates top to bottom that you should do UX, that's nice on paper, but it doesn't mean that it's actually like executed and lived on all those levels. And why? Because UX is different from development, the people are different from development, what they do is different, the background, a lot of things are different. And to get to this yin-yang state takes some effort. I remember that years ago I had a colleague, and she went from a UX shop straight into a hardcore engineering environment in the area of power distribution. We're all hardcore engineers and a lot of developers also. And she's been working there for 1 year until she had her first management review. So for 1 year, she's been working in this group, and then, manager said, okay, we have to do our review, our yearly review now. And so he sat her down and said, okay, so, what's with your, development skills? Where's your C++ skill set now after a year? And she said, I'm not a developer. I don't know what C++ is. I don't know what you talk about. And he asks, who are you? What are you? I only have developers working for me. What are you? She says, I'm the UX person. I'm the guy, I'm the person who builds those blueprints, those specs that your developers will implement. And he said, okay, you're doing a great job. See you next year. So just a little bit trying to shine light on this one here, that people may not understand what people are doing. Some people may not be interested. There may be a lot of organizational challenges to make all this happen. And one way to actually measure the pulse on the UX in an organization is to see, is there any indication that UX is valued, or that a company is ready for UX? Ready doesn't mean that they actually do it the right way, but if it's ready. And these bullets here are from a study that a couple of companies, including Apogee and Sage, were carrying out. I don't agree with all of these bullets, but it's interesting, right? Management uses UX vocabulary. Okay, that's because they went to those conferences and heard a lot about UX. The question is, what it actually means for the organization. I used to work with a guy 10 years ago who I met after 10 years last year in Dublin. And he works for SAP now, and he said, worst case scenario, our executives keep talking about design thinking. Design thinking is like one of those buzzwords in UX design. And I said, what's wrong with that? Isn't that good? I mean, it means that they know about this. It means they care about this. It means that they probably free up some resources to make that happen. What's wrong with your executives talking about design thinking? And he said, well, it's not clear if they actually know what they talk about. And what we should do is not design thinking, but design doing. So it's nice as an indicator. It may not mean a lot. A director or VP of UX was hired. That only means that you have people that have some influence and some decision power caring about UX. Because otherwise you end up in a situation with this colleague of mine who worked for a year and the manager doesn't even know about it. And so that means that you don't have the influence, you don't have the input and the impact. So if you're in a managerial position, you have that leverage. Usability testing is a given. That's again usability testing. It's one of the things that are relatively easy to do and have quite some impact. From all the things that can be done for UX in a lifecycle management process, usability testing is a good start, but it shouldn't end there. That's why it always feels it sticks out from this list, because why just this? There's much more things to do. Then you have budgets that you can use for getting the professionals in. Usability labs are in place or under discussion. I basically grew up in a usability lab, and I have to say, over the last 10 years, the trend has been gone away from labs. They are very cost intense. They are also intimidating test users that you have, because you hear these remote cameras and you feel observed through this James Bond mirrors. The only reason why I agree to some extent with having this on the list is If you have a lab and you spend this $50,000 to equip that lab, it means that you had made an investment. So there's some dedication visible. And the last one, product management believes that UX yields strategic advantage. That is interesting because product management, as the persons who actually define your product, the features, they define who you're selling to, if they believe in that, that's a very important win. Because if you try to go against them and say, I know better what your users or our customers will need, that's not a productive approach here. And so we just talked about usability testing is a nice indicator that a company does something right in UX, which would be this bullet here. I put it as a medium effort in here because it really depends what kind of usability testing you want to drive. If you want to do a random test at a random time in your development process, the effort is super low, but the impact may also be very low. Usability testing, when you use it in a formative way, that means it drives the design. You do it throughout the development life cycle. It's a little bit higher of an effort because there's several test series that you have to do. But in all cases, the impact is really high. Why? Because for a lot of companies, for the first time, they get real hard and semi-scientific empirical evidence about whether their product is usable or not, if they are on the right track or not. I may have an opinion as a UX designer about a design, whether it's good or bad. You as a stakeholder may have an opinion. You as a software architect may have an opinion. It really doesn't matter about your or my opinion. It matters about these end users. If they can do what they want to do with the product, that's important. And that's what usability testing brings home. The strongest thing ever that you can do, but also the hardest, is the first one, process integration. Only through process integration you can make this sustainable and repeatable. And that's why the impact is super high, but the effort is also super high. It involves analyzing the current process. It may mean re-engineering that process. It may mean talking with people that have completely no idea about UX and the details to actually get the permission to come up with a standardized process approach in a larger company. Other things would include, let's just pick one, persona development. Personas are basically stand-ins for the real end users. It's kind of like the prototypical user groups that you want to target and that you want to have like in the back of your heads when you make decisions. So for example, you define a persona that's called Helen, and Helen has these and these characteristics and these expectations and wishes and those workflows that she has to do. And with that knowledge, you can basically supplement meetings with stakeholders that, for example, revolve around, should we include feature A, should we include feature B, should we change feature C? And you would ask, what would Helen think about this? Does integrating feature B help Helen and her life? And so what we did, for example, in my company, at one point we developed some personas and actually ordered those life-size cutouts. We put T-shirts on them and just like put them in the corridors and hallways. We put them into our meetings, and it was really well received. She was actually from HR. Really has nothing to do with actual development, but she took a photo with him because it's my new buddy, and she blogged about it and put it on Facebook and stuff. So that's the idea of a persona, to make abstract data about user groups and their needs tangible and experienceable. Another way to look at the same problem about, or the same issue about how mature is our organization or our process in terms of UX is looking at those maturity models. And the best known one is from Jacob Nielsen. Jean Van Tine published one. Aaron Marcus and friends have a model. And they may be varying in their nuances, but they basically all say the same thing, which is you cannot go from zero to full-fledged superhero UX state in one step. There's stages. And Nielsen, for him, stage one is where user characteristics and user needs are not considered. And he calls it hostility, which I think is really strong. Maybe it's more ignorance or lack of knowledge or something, but the effect is user characteristics are not considered in the development. While then stage 2 is called developer-centered usability, where development teams rely on their own intuition and on their own resources and knowledge to stem the UX topic. And then it goes like increasingly into more repeatable processes and more professional approaches where there's dedicated budgets, there's a dedicated group, there's process integration and things are now process-driven, and all the way to heaven where in stage 8, the whole company, the whole organization is now user-driven in that the strategy of the company relies on data that comes from users to define what the company actually is all about. So I'm not saying that it has to be your goal by tomorrow to get to stage 8. It may not be actually a goal for you at all to go to stage 8. But I would be already happy if companies moved that direction and would go at least like to this level here. Again, to me, the heaven is process integration, because that's where you get the results. And so the question comes to mind, obviously, okay, if you want to go beyond the developer-centered usability approach, I need people who actually have a background in that field, who know that stuff, who are completely dedicated on this. And what can we do? We can outsource or we can insource. Outsourcing, the big advantage of outsourcing is that you have fast access to those people without a lot of commitments. Because if you have subcontractors, if you have consulting companies that work for you, you get very good expertise very rapidly. And when the project is over or when you feel they stink, you just throw them out again. No problem. The other big advantage is that those people normally bring in knowledge and experiences from other domains and from other verticals and industries, which may be very helpful. I talk with a lot of companies that say, we've been looking at our product in our industry for 15, 20 years. We don't know what the world is around us. We don't know how things are solved in another vertical. Because in the end, if you look at it on an atomic level, user interface design or interaction design, it's always the same thing. It's those CRUD operations. You create something, you delete something, you manage something, it's all the same. But the context is different. So those people are able to bring in solutions and patterns from healthcare and apply them in whatever, oil and gas well management. That's the strength of this approach to outsource things. There's also cons. And one thing is that they may be very good in UX design. They may know things from other verticals and industries. But depending on how specific your domain is, you actually have to train those people. So now that means they cannot be productive on day one, but there's some knowledge transfer that has to happen. You have to get these people up to speed on what your world is all about, with the risk that they take that knowledge out after the engagement and then you lose it. That's the big con here for outsourcing. Whether or not there's an increased communication effort really depends on where your outsourced people are. If you obviously outsource work to another company around the world, that because of this may yield in a much higher communication effort. The alternative strategy would be, well, you insource it, you build your own team with the con that you retain those people. If you build that domain knowledge with your own people, you retain that and you don't lose that after a project. You just have to make sure that you actually keep those people on staff and that they don't leave you. And so that's, on the flip side, the con here. You have commitment though. What happens if you have some large-scale system that is only upgraded to new versions every 3 or 4 years? There's still those systems around. So what do you do with your UX team then that is internal and is costing you money? If everything is really good right now and but the next development will only start in a year and a half, what do you do with those people? So here you have the commitment that you do not have here. Long way of saying it really depends whether side of this slide here is best for you. but these are the options. I want to talk a little bit about the worldview of UX people, and just demonstrate that some of the worldviews, where they come from, what they believe in, are very, very compatible and actually similar, if not the same, to people in the technical field, and some are very different. So it's important to know that. So the one question that I think you will be very familiar with is, if you want to conceptualize something, if you want to design something, a product, do you first want to go in the depth, and then only you will go into the width, or the other way around, where you first worry about the width and then the depth? Unanimously, you will tell me that what is better? Pardon?
Depends on what you're doing.
Yes. If you have to develop a new product, and you may not know the complete feature set, you don't have the complete spec yet, but in the end result, this here is a package of a product. Do you first investigate what you know to all the extent, to the last bit and byte, and then design and develop that first? Or do you first want to know the breadth of this and say, okay, I may not know all the depth yet, but at least I know the main features? Exactly. So, okay, I was a little bit worried here for a second. And that's really like 99.99% of ever talk to that are developers say that's principally the better approach. And interestingly, this is exactly what UX people think as well. That is interesting, and it has some implications I will show you a couple of slides down. So width first, and then depth. The other thing is, and that's a little bit different and strange for maybe a lot of you, is that a UX person will always come up with a lot of different alternatives. They will not come back to you when the challenge is to come up with the first concept, the first wireframes or the first sketches. They will not come back to you and say, here's my solution. Let's test this, or let's run with this. What they do is they will open the design space and will say, I will work out alternatives. And some of them will be completely crazy and pushing the envelope maybe too far. Some will be conservative. And then you have all these other versions in the middle. And the reason why this is done, and it just comes from design, that's what they teach in design school, but it's a very good practice because UX in its nature is very iterative. The reason for that is that once you have alternatives, only then you want to discuss and review them with stakeholders, and developers and software architects may be part of that stakeholder team. And also those can then be tested and reviewed with actual end users. And only then you would focus on the real and final solution. So now the design space is shrunk again, and you focus in on this one ideal solution and on the way you add more and more detail. So you see here that different layouts are tried out, and here's some colors, and here it's more about also the mapping to the technical device that your UI is running on. So that's what is really important to know. And why is that important for you personally? Well, this may impact delivery timeframes. This may have process impacts because on the one side, the more you ideate, the more you try out, probably the better the result is, but who has the time to do that? So how do you find the middle ground between, well, yeah, I do want to explore, but I also know that there's tons of stuff down the road that I have to do also technically to build this thing. I may not have the time for this. And that now talks about processes. This one ISO standard that talks about UX at all lengths, 9241, also introduced a design process that is super simple, and it's basically the mother of all user-centered processes you will ever see in your life. And it's very simple. Basically, starting by saying there is already an identified need for a user-centered or a human-centered design approach. And from there, the first thing that's done is not designing anything or developing anything or do anything that puts out a solution. The first thing is understanding the context in which the product will be used. And that's why this definition I like so much, the anticipated experience. That maps to this first step here. Understanding the context in which the system is used. And that context is the users, the equipment, the tasks, and the environment, social and physical environment. And then after you have that, then you talk about requirements. Eliciting requirements, gathering requirements, testing requirements, documenting requirements. There's like formal checklists against what are good requirements and bad requirements, for example, from IEEE. And obviously, you're completely knowledgeable about requirements. It's just that those user requirements tend to be non-functional. So they're a little bit harder both to elicit and formulate and also to track later during the development process. And then obviously, once you have requirements, it's then when you start design and not earlier. If you design without knowing this, you design in a vacuum. You design on your desk not knowing what the reality is out there in the world. So that's why you need the context of use knowledge. If you design without being guided by requirements, you may just design something that you care and love, but nobody's interested in. You just don't map to the requirements. And that's why the next step is to evaluate those designs against the requirements. Okay. And then there's two options. You have every single requirement fulfilled, in which case you are done, or you have not met all those requirements, which then means that you do another iteration. So that's all very, very simplistic. But the nice thing about these very simple models is you can memorize them, and you can understand them. The challenge then is just, okay, how do I translate this 30,000 foot level process into something that works in my company with my team? An integrated process would imply that you don't have a UX process in isolation and you don't have a technical development process in isolation, but they work together. And then you have a strong user-centered application lifecycle management process. That's a long word. And you see here things like user research and design interaction, and you see mock-ups, and then you see things that are more closer to your heart, architecting the framework and doing real prototypes and defining the data models. So again, this is also a 30,000 foot view. It just shows that, yes, in the end, a turnkey process may look something like this. Obviously, every development project is different. But in the end, to make it more tangible, in most instances, you go through these 6 things, where, again, it starts not with developing, it starts not with designing, it starts with asking questions. Questions about this context of use. Who are my users? It sounds so trivial. But if I ask stakeholders, let's talk about your users. What user groups do you have? And the first guy says, we have 3, and here are they, A, B, and C. And then the guy next to him says, listen, I think we actually have 5, because we also have X and Y, and they're actually separate user groups. The other guy says, no, they're the same. So all of a sudden you realize that something that looks so simple as to say, do you know your users? Sure, we know our users. When it's down to like, what is it that they need? What is it, what the expectations are? What is it that they have to do different from the other user group? It's sometimes hard because nobody ever documented those differences. This also includes things like how computer savvy are the users? How old are those users? Are they more men? Are they all more female? All kinds of things that you can ask. And again, this ISO standard has a couple of checklists for that. And all this has implications on the design. We don't just ask this because we are bored. It has design implications. I'll show you an example in a second. Equipment, yeah, we need to know what kind of equipment the users will use. Do we talk about a financial trading app where the guy sits in front of 6 monitors? Or do we talk about a guy with a single monitor? Do we talk about a person that is using a smartphone? Do we use about a responsive design, bring your own device solution that runs on all different form factors? Yeah, it's important to know. But mainly, the real important thing here is talking about the tasks. Because we don't design a system, here's one screen, and then we design the next screen on Tuesday, and then the third one on Wednesday. We design a system. So we design for flows between the screens and within the screens. We design for productivity, for workflow orientation. And that's why if you don't know what the intended usage is, what people try to accomplish, it's impossible to design something that really works. There's no wow factor in doing something that shows just like eye candy stuff in nice colors that has no purpose. It doesn't optimize an application. And that is very involved. Understanding these tasks and workflows and accomplishments that people try to accomplish can be tough, especially in very narrow domains. Whether this plays a role or not also depends. For regular Office applications, you don't really have to worry about lighting and noise and that kind of stuff. But mobile solutions, you take your tablet outside, you take your smartphone outside, all of a sudden you don't hear your voice prompts anymore, the sun shines on your display and swallows all your color contrasts. It's important to know that kind of stuff. Or here, in a manufacturing plant, an operating room that is dark, and they run very light SCADA systems here, like very light screens. It's really a bad design because it tires the eyes. Eyes have to also always accommodate for brightness when they look away to something else. So it's important to know that. But oftentimes it doesn't play a role if you just develop Office applications. The next step then is, like I said, opening this design space and come up with alternatives. It can be as rough as this, pencil on a napkin. This is an actual example for FedEx, where we knew from our context of user analysis that their users were not very computer savvy. They were more like casual users. It's the guys who just look up, oh, what do I have to ship today? And what's the address of the shipment and these kind of things. But they all use Outlook. So the only idea that we wanted to show in this one sketch was to say, why not use an Outlook navbar to actually give them access to their workflow steps, which is shipping, tracking, reporting, and closing. That was the only idea. We didn't care in this sketch about the menu, if there's a menu, what menu, is it a ribbon, not a ribbon, what not. About the logo treatment, we didn't care. We didn't care if the content here is actually based on a tab structure or on sliders or whatnot. It was just an idea. But it's something you can then discuss. So we discussed with stakeholders, talked with users, and it was very well received. So it's like, okay, that idea actually may work. And now you have to go a step further and actually stress test this idea because this is so rough. People may say, yeah, it's awesome. But once you work with the real data elements and your real functions on the screen, this may break down very, very soon, especially if you have all the other screens next to it also that have to fit the same structure. And so that's where wireframes come in. Wireframes are more detailed than sketches. They're still all fake. It's nothing in code. This is Balsamic. This is our own tool. It's called Indigo Studio. This is OmniGraffle. This is PowerPoint. This is Visio. All fake for the purpose to be fast and cheap. Because now that we tried out, does this concept work when we have the real content? If it turned out it did not work, just doesn't work, it breaks down on screen 4, which is another reason why you want to do breadth first. You don't lose a lot of money in throwing something away that was done in Visio, as opposed to if I had done this in a real architecture way as a prototype, for example. And then already on this stage here, on a wireframe stage, I can make this semi-interactive. I can put this into PowerPoint, for example, and link some buttons to make it a little bit more experienceable. And then I can show it to end users and say, mind that this is not really designed yet. There's no visual layer on top of this. But do you know what you're looking at? Would you know where you are in the system? Would you know in your workflow where you are and what comes next? Would you know how to go back? All this you can test at this level already before anything is started to be built. Then you would document this thing and would say, okay, for development then they probably need a little bit more than just those wireframe sets. That may be a UI spec where you decompose that screen into the subparts and describe all those subparts. What happens on tab here or mouse click there. You may just provide augmented wireframes, which are just wireframes together with some narrations on the side. And then, yeah, it will start to get built. So that's the same project. You see here, it's the same thing. It literally translates this to that. But now we talk about the real thing. So now this is a Windows Forms example, but it really doesn't matter. This is now real. Now you can bind this to data. You can try this out. You can look at the performance of things. Everything is real. Obviously, it still looks like the proverbial Soviet tank built on a Monday, which is then why it has to be styled. When the definition of this styling actually happens, I will talk in a second, but at some point, the product will be become styled and get a visual design treatment. And the impact obviously is clear that now we talk about iconography, highlight colors, gradients, and all these kind of things. Note that this doesn't say FedEx. And that's the reason because we didn't get permission to show this using their real brand colors and their real logo. So we just camouflage things. And then at some point, again, usability testing. My opinion doesn't count. Your opinion doesn't count. The opinion about the final targeted end users count. If they struggle with it, there's a problem, no matter if I say it's brilliant or not. So principally, the handovers, those sketches, those wireframes, those comps that the visual designer would generate, the code that the developer is generating, principally the handovers between those different roles that I have not really defined yet are those that somebody has to do this analysis, this context of use clarification, asking all those W questions. That knowledge then is transferred, and not only to the person who is doing this interaction design being the definition of the structure, the content, the navigation, the interaction of a product, but all the other roles profit from that the same way. So when we go to a customer and we come up with a report that covers this context of use, we actually provide this to everybody on the team, also to developers, because it helps them to better understand what they will build, even though they may at this point, when the interaction design starts, not actually working on that project yet, but they get the brief already. It's really helpful. Now, in a more linear way like this, the knowledge that comes and the artifacts that come from the interaction design is handed to the visual design role. The visual design role works then on basically putting some clothes to that skeleton wireframe. The wireframe is naked. They put the cloth on it. They work on color schemes, animations, the iconography, typography, the brand integration. And if they're good, they will also generate code assets, because that saves a lot of time in terms of documenting things. If the same person that came up with the design approach also can generate the code assets for you as developers, because then there's no need to write 400 pages specs of some hex codes. They just do it on their own. And then it hits development. Obviously, it can look completely different. This is actually not that different. It's just like that visual design and development work concurrently. It can also work like this, where here are the comps that are generated, and then we actually style it after the fact, with the challenge that the visual designers have to be able to actually work in your code, and a lot of visual designers cannot do that. So that's principally handovers of artifacts. And what those artifacts are varies, but typically everything that's revolving around usability issues are things like defining scenarios, defining use cases, defining user stories, just to document what actually is happening in the usage context of the product. So this is not design yet, this is analysis. And some people like formal use cases because they are formal, and by that it's once you know them, very easy to digest that information in them. Some like better scenarios because it's easier to digest, but they tend to be lengthy. It really depends on who is actually inheriting those artifacts. On the design area, on the interaction design, so not the visual design, They produce sketches, wireframes, augmented wireframes that also blend into the documentation already. Documentation being augmented wireframes, UI specs, maybe style guides. Oftentimes, the specification is actually done through mockups, kind of like a live spec. It's like, hey, before I write down 300 pages of things that nobody will ever read, I will just mock it up for you in an interactive way. You can go through it and see what's happening. It works to some extent. It works in understanding the flow, but it usually never is enough to actually allow a developer to actually program it based on that template, because there's many more questions in the details. On the visual design side, what visual designers are doing is they create those vision screens or comps that are basically pixel exact versions of what the final product will look like. The real look and feel, but just as an image. It's just Photoshop or Fireworks, a flat file image. They work on the icons. They integrate artwork like photography and other imagery. They work on design specs, mock-ups, and if they're good, also on code assets. And so what is generated really depends on the needs. I remember once I worked for Siemens, and we had outsourced developers in India. And unfortunately, those people came from a more back-end development background, but they all did front-end work for us. And so I literally wrote 300 pages of specs. I swear, 300 pages. And amazingly, they read every single line of it. Why? Because they needed the information. If you have staff developers that are really good in front end, they will never need that level of detail. Internally, when we build our own stuff with our own team, we usually stop at the augmented wireframes level. These are just basically state, action, state sequences of wireframes with some annotations on the right. That's it. Since it's internally, if there's questions, they can ask us questions. But creating an augmented wireframe set as opposed to a style guide is a difference of weeks, sometimes months. So it really depends on who's inheriting what. Do we need to create CSS or XAML from the visual designers? Or is it actually more straightforward to have the developers do that because they are much faster? Counterbalancing then the need for actually speccing all these things. Like a UI, a visual design style guide has to be written for them. It really depends on who are the resources who take on those artifacts. So waterfall process as one of the prototypical processes I want to show here, just again to make it a little bit more concrete than saying, well, UX is all about understanding the context of use, getting requirements, designing and testing. Okay, that's fine. But I actually went through the exercise of like defining this for a very large company, what it actually means to integrate UX, and they were running a waterfall process. And waterfall being, one phase after the other. There's no, meanwhile, yes, there are recurrences, but principally it's like a one-way street. That's why they always talk about downstream and upstream, because it only goes one way. If you then look at the different tiers that make up those waterfall processes, all these milestones that have to happen, it becomes very apparent that UX has really something to offer here, because if in a formal process, everything starts, and this is here the M100 milestone, with a formal project start. You ask yourself, okay, and what happens before that? Because something has to happen to make the decision to start the project. And actually, I have this layer here of what actually is needed as an input to reach those milestones. To reach, in this case, the M100, you have to have an evaluated product idea. Okay, and who's doing that? Somebody has an idea. It has to be evaluated by somebody who actually do the evaluation. So that is, for example, something where traditionally product marketing people were doing this. So somebody had an idea and they went out and did market research. Turns out market research, as product marketing people would do it, is basically asking 2,000 people, a representative sample, would you need, whatever, like certain features or a certain product. Now, it turns out they love UX people because the UX people complement their approach in that the UX people are more qualitative. It's not the quantity. It's not about asking 2,000 people very shallow questions. It's actually going to the depth and actually taking this idea and translating this idea into something that is tangible for users to actually go in more depth and ask them, this product in your life, in your work, in your situation, does it make sense? And then you get really reliable data back from there that they can mix and mingle with their quantitative data. So that's why UX here really helps. And then obviously if you look at the classic steps that come afterwards, which is at sometimes you have to have requirements signed off. This is not agile, so here you have like formal requirements and they have to be signed off. The decision for realization, when do we start with the realization of this product? When do we announce that internally we have the product? When do you get to technical feasibility? When do you actually deploy it and actually bring it to the market? All the way through, when do we phase it out? When's the sunset here? And you see the inputs here are all things that UX really can play a good role in terms of market analysis. Well, the requirements have to be formulated. There's a lot of technical requirements involved, but there's also a lot of the non-functional requirements involved that may come from competitor analysis, that maybe come from studies that are done beforehand, including those. The technical specs that have to be written. Part of that technical spec on one level are all the UI specs. The guidelines, the style guides, the interaction design concept, the visual specs, all this is part of what the set of technical specs have to deliver to actually reach the next milestone. So this is a very linear way to look at this, but message here is UX has been working and still works in mainly all of them. Not very much in development itself, because UX design typically happens before development. When development actually is happening, it's more like ad hoc work. It's like there's things that the spec may have not completely defined, or there's ad hoc issues that need to be solved. Can you handle this? Then you do that. Now, in an agile world, things are a little bit different, but the whole idea about agile being iterative and things work in sprints maps naturally very well to UX because, like this ISO model said, UX always has been very iterative. So that's fine. The way you integrate there is basically that when before Sprint Zero you do the basic research that basically includes the user research. And then basically using Sprint Zero to come up with a base design, a reliable and stable and mature base design. And again, that goes back to the width before depth. I know that the last thing that developers want to hear is big design up front. The biggest enemy in the agile world is big design up front. So you may fear that, oh my God, here in Sprint Zero, we let loose those crazy UX people and they will spend 6 months on creating something that is completely done. And then we want to do our agile process where it's like iterations and sprints after sprints. So how does that fit? It's not about big design up front. It's just as much as necessary and as little as possible to define a base design. And a little bit more concretely, I can show it maybe this way. If here you have your sprint lineup, and in Sprint Zero you do your base research and planning, you define your backlog, and you define the base concept in a design world, you then have a developer track and you have a designer track. And so when Sprint 1 is happening and things are worked initially on the software architecture, it's also the time to start implementing in conjunction with this the base concept that has been defined here. And then what happens is that design works in a shifted manner. So that design works in the next sprint while implementation lags one sprint behind. So here, for Sprint 1, UX would support in an ad hoc fashion Sprint 1, and they would also start to design for Sprint 2. And so this is then an input for Sprint 2, and while Sprint 2 is happening, there's 3 things happening on the design side. review the output of sprint 1, support the current sprint, and design for the next sprint. And that kind of manner is just a shifted approach that basically was invented by Autodesk. They were the first guys who actually implemented an integrated UX agile process that way. But I always have the hardest time not getting thrown tomatoes at conferences sometimes when I just mention it makes some sense to use Sprint 0 to come up with the base design concept. And then, thank you for being very polite. People then freak out and say, this is big design upfront, we hate it.
So, in practice, we do try and do this where the UX guys start before development.
Yeah?
After a few sprints, very quickly, the dev team or the UX team is not in front of the dev team anymore.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
I don't know, our developers are really good.
Okay. See, my suspicion is that while you try to do this,
Right.
my suspicion is that you don't define the complete base design. My suspicion is that you do this depth first, and you start with something that those designers may know very well, and they say, well, the rest we figure out later. But that time, you will never get back. This other stuff we figure out later, in a design world, is much more involved because design implies you work with users, with stakeholders, you do testing. So unless this is a really solid and mature base model, you run into the risk of actually losing the pace, and then you get actually overturned by development.
Okay, so in that instance where we don't have, we're trying to do this as quick as possible, so naturally we won't have, months to come up with a design.
Yeah.
How do you handle that situation?
Well, I can tell you what we recently did was a project that was 20 sprints long, and we were discussing doing that. And they kind of like had the same concerns, saying, this is really, really involved. We see that this makes sense, but gee, I mean, that's quite some cost involved here, like to get the people who work here and to integrate this, which they never had done before. So what we ended up doing together was actually that not the only time, but the main time where UX people worked on this project was doing this, but without sacrifices. There was no time pressure. We said, if we focus in on this, we need our time, which is the reason why I show all this here, because this has implications on the planning of the whole process, right? You have to have enough time available for this base thing here. The better this is, the shorter these efforts will be. But for this company, we did everything we did in this here. Gave them a solid base design. Obviously, there were many questions unanswered, like in the depth of it, but the base concept was stable. And then we said, okay, it's a 20-sprint process. Let's meet up after sprint 7 or 8, and we see what you've done with our design. How much did you deviate? How much things, because they have to come up with some answers on their own because we were not involved, right? So we basically did some intermediary reviews and said, okay, here's what you did here. Here are things that may work better or something. And then we also, like in the middle of the project, did some more formal things like usability testing. So I'm not sure if that's the smartest way to do it, but it was a practical way. Somewhere in between, we don't do any UX, and we do it maybe in that way. It's getting the first baby steps, I guess. Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah. You had a question or a comment?
I'm actually from the same company.
Okay.
I think something different about where we are in this example is that our sprint 0, which was about 5 years ago, so actually we're in a state of continuous improvement now.
Okay.
And that's where some different phenomena start.
Yes.
So we're working on it.
Yes. Okay. It pushes the definition of agile, though, right?
Yeah, but it's 2 weeks sprint. So
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good comment, right? So what happens if it's lengthy cycles or lengthy life cycles, and the need for UX arises only later? So what do you do then? Well, just looking at this one here, it would still give you information on what can be done even late in the game, because in the waterfall world, it's the same thing. Once, like for lengthy life cycles, once you are in the commercialization phase, it doesn't mean that you are done with even like UX work, because it's then when you want to go in and analyze what works good, what does not work good, in what way do we have to change the product for the next releases. So infusing an like insertion point for UX even late is still possible, mainly because UX is so iterative. You can start at various places, knowing though that cost of changes increase exponentially over time, that ideally you want to start with this from the beginning. But I know that's not always reality.
Yeah, well, what we're doing, I don't pretend it's the perfect answer, but I'll suggest it because someone else might find it useful. The development team run agile 2-week sprints. The UX team, they look at the release plan that looks over, say, 6 months.
Yeah.
And try to predict where the development team are going to be in 6 months. And the UX team work to the waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
It's not ideal because you find late changes are really painful. So sort of.
I mean, honestly, this is pure waterfall. This is pretty much pure agile. I always call what I see with customers free fall. Because, and funnily, the biggest companies have the roughest processes. I'm not sure why, but they cut corners right and left. So I've never seen a real pure waterfall done the right way, or like right way as in textbook knowledge, nor have I ever seen the right agile process. Because people cut corners right and left. And in the end, there's so much stress in reaching the timelines that that maybe was your issue also with the developers being faster than the designers, that you have to have it happen somehow, Okay, so.
Sorry, can I just ask, Wade?
Sure.
The line between UX and architecture, on that last diagram, you've got UX in
This one?
sprint 0, yeah, and then you've got architecture first appearing in sprint 1. And that's where I'm struggling with UX, because, fundamentally, right from college 20-some years ago, we were taught you don't design from the UI. You actually do your architecture, you do your object modeling, your data modeling, you think about the structures, and then you think about how you can present that in the best way. Well, we are investing in UX, but what we're seeing is lots of wireframes that are shown to users, we're then committed to those, and actually they're not producing the best architecture.
Mm-hmm.
They're producing some pretty pictures, but that's not necessarily the best architecture. And there seems to be a rub there. They should maybe be working more closely together.
And that may be one reason why a lot of people shy away from using those integrated agile processes. Because the question is, in the end, if there's conflict, who overrules who? Like, you make a very solid point that in the end, the architecture has to work, and your data models have to work, and your database has to work. Front end is more flexible in that respect. Hardcore UX people would say everything that the design implies has to impact all the way back to the database. So, if we go out as UX designers and we find out certain assumptions that during software architecture were not really found out there, and people have a different workflow, for example, they need different data propagated up to the front end. This may change all the way down and back to the back end, but they would say, yeah, then you better do it, because that's the approach of user-centered design. So that fundamentally just talks about who rules the decision here. So in that respect, I don't think you can resolve that without clarifying that question. And that may be, in terms of those maturity models, the difference between some of those levels. Again, not saying that it has to be UX always. It really depends on what the organization is putting their bugs in. Okay? But see, I knew that we would talk about things when I show this. I got followed in one conference by one person. She followed me all the way to the lunch tables and said, "Did you say big design up front?" I said, "No, I said design up front, not big design up front." Because I tweeted about this. Okay. And just like the last couple of slides, talking a little bit about, okay, who's actually make this happen? If I stand here and say, you actually should have people with a real background and real knowledge in UX to do UX, what does it involve? User-centered design is the overall term for this. And so in analysis, you do things like ethnography and anthropology, and you have people that know something about psychology and human factors. Human factors being what are the capabilities and limitations of humans, and what does it mean for system design. In design, you talk about graphic design, visual design, brand integration, industrial design, user interface design. And in testing, I have nothing in testing. Testing is validating whether you're on the right track or not. So you also need somebody who can do testing. So are these all different people? Is it all the same? Or is it not? What you see typically in this area is that people have titles like system analysts. I was a system analyst at one point. Basically working together with business analysts and bridging the gap between wants and solutions. The wants is like, oh, we need X, Y, and Z. And then the solution is, well, would that work? Again, 10 years ago, we were called usability engineers. There was no UX back then. And then there's very specialized roles, ethnographers, anthropologists. I worked with linguists that are very, very focused on one very specific area. Honestly, for the vast majority of companies, this is much too specific. They just cannot afford having an ethnographer working for them. I mean, this is level of Procter & Gamble that defines basically new product lines with their ethnographers. So that's a little bit out there. In design, we talk about information architecture, and that to me is design. It's not analysis, because information architecture for me is the organization and naming and labeling of content. And that to me is design. It's not analysis, because the way you structure the content in the product is experienceable by the user. Yeah, you put interaction design around it and visual design around it, but the core of what people do is surrounding information. Interaction design is basically the structure, the layout, what kind of interactivity do I use to make certain things happen, and visual designers are the people to make it attractive and modern, contemporary, exuding value, integrating brand. And then testing, sometimes you actually see dedicated roles that says usability tester. But normally, 90% of all cases is actually the same person who also does that work here and parts of the IA and interaction design. So then the question is always, well, if you want to start this, what people do I need? Do I need an ethnographer? Do I need a usability tester? What you actually need is, you need what I call a UX architect. That's just a fancy word of saying a usability engineer, to do the interaction design and the analysis. So this person would do all this, analyzing things, defining things. And you need a visual designer, the person who does the attractiveness. Now, is this one or two resources? In 15 years, I've not met a single person who could do both of them. Just because it's very, very different skill sets. They go to very different schools. There's no overlap, meaning that in design school, you don't learn anything about this. If you study cognitive psychology or computer science with an HCI emphasis, you don't learn anything about this. So it's very, very hard. I hear that those people are out. I've never met somebody. I always try to hire these people. It never worked. So if you have those people, if you find one, give them something to eat and that they never go away. You want to retain those people. But normally, in the normal real world, these are two resources. Okay, job titles, you will see and hear a lot of different job titles. And they may sound, oh, wrong way. They may sound like this. Come on, one more pixel. Sorry, I do. Better here.
experience analyst at Blue Triangle Digital.
I'm a transformative human designer with Redshape Studios.
I'm a human factor socialist.
I'm a holistic immersion strategist at Purple Octagon UX.
We're in San Francisco/New York.
Are you an interaction designer?
No. I design for that.
So immersive strategist or whatever this guy was. So it's just to say that there's a lot of titles out there and increasingly a lot of fake titles. Like, people just call themselves whatever they want because it's modern. It's very hard to see through that clutter and see, who's actually out there. So again, I said you need a UX architect, you need a visual designer. For UX architect, if you see something, interaction designer, UX architect, usability engineer, human factors specialist, human factors engineer, it's all the same. But if you are in a team and the manager says, hey, meet the new guy, and he's the UX person, and he's our new human factor specialist, it's not a very good indication because it's really old school. Nobody today would call himself either usability engineer or human factor specialist. I had all these titles, but a long time ago. So today, you would normally see UX architect or interaction designer. That's what it is. And for visual design, it's also very complicated because you have graphic designers, visual designers, and industrial designers. That's the three typical job titles. And there's a big difference between them. Although they all went to the same school, they all have the same design approach, but they design for different media. Graphic designers are those people who work on banners, newsletters, they do printing, packaging, and they're obsessed with typography. So if you hear somebody talking about Helvetica all day long, it's a graphic designer. And nothing wrong with graphic designers, but they work normally on more static media. While in interaction design, in the field of products, line of business applications, websites, it's very interactive. It's not static. And so here, visual designers come in. People that do websites, line of business applications, they're more concerned with iconography over typography. That's how you can tell them apart. But they work interactive. And there's a big difference. You try to set somebody with a graphic design background on your product that you design a line of business application. It's a different animal because the design space is much, much smaller. Even within a visual design area, right? Somebody who only knows how to design websites will really struggle designing an LOB application. Why? Because on a website, you have an infinite canvas. You can scroll down and nobody worries about scrolling down. You can have large images and photos of happy people. Line of business applications, they are ruled and dominated by data. It's data grids, there's charts in there. There's actually no wiggle room to be really elegant. And yet, that's exactly the job that visual designers have to do. Make this look modern and attractive. So it's really a hard job. Industrial designers, by the way, are those people who worry about hardware. So they do devices, Steve Ive, they do the case for the iPhones, they do medical equipment, they do the furniture and that kind of stuff. So they're not really applicable to what we're looking here. So if you ever have the role to find these people or to mingle with people, you want these people and you want visual designers. And how can you recognize a really good UX person? Number one is degree in the field. Why? It's not because I'm obsessed with academic backgrounds and stuff, but if somebody went to school and actually has a degree in those fields as a UX architect or those fields as a visual designer, at least you know that they have a background, somebody actually tested them because otherwise they wouldn't have a degree, and that separates a lot of people that are just self-taught and because they read 2 blogs and they put on their resume, I'm an interaction designer. Look for the resumes. If they have a degree in the field, that's a good indicator. It doesn't mean that they're really good in what they're doing, but they at least have the background. What you want to look for is job experience. Do they actually have the experience to build software as opposed to banner ads again or designing nice newsletters? 2 years minimum. One of the findings that Forrester came up with that I showed you earlier was that people tend to apply the wrong patterns to design. patterns being the repeatable template solutions. It comes not only through textbook knowledge that you may learn here, it comes with experience. And so that's why I would say 2 years is the bare minimum. And then they have to have technical skills. A UX architect needs to be able to carry out those context of use analysis and do wireframing and spec something out, do usability testing. They use tools like Visio, Balsamiq, Exure, our own Indigo Studio. So they have to have some technical skills. Oftentimes, developers think about UX people as those soft skill people. They just talk and do wireframes. There's some technical skills involved to handling certain tools here. The same goes for visual designers. To be able to do theming and branding, iconography, to create code assets, yeah, you need to have some skills. You need to know your way around, obviously, Adobe. Every single person that is a good visual designer uses Adobe Suite. Most of them use Photoshop. And if you have people that actually can also create XAML assets, those resource dictionaries or the brush definitions using Expression Blend, that's a really big plus because you will not find these people easily. 95% of visual designers never touch that and never will. For them, it's all about web and Photoshop. Yeah, they need communication skills. There's no user-centered design without users, which means you have to be able to engage with users. You have to be able to go out there and find yourself around in a domain that you may not even be familiar with. You have to be able to communicate to stakeholders. You have to be able to write an email. And it sounds super trivial, but I can tell you, there's people that cannot even write an email. So verbal and written communication skills. And then obviously, to determine if somebody is a good resource for UX, look at their prior work. I mean, that's what we do when we staff people. That's what every same person would do is show me prior art. Show me what you did before. And if you happen to be an organization that does only web site projects, and you have somebody who only has worked on banners before, you would say, well, I'm not sure if you can do this. Maybe I give you a test assignment. Maybe I give you some homework, and you come back in 3 days and show me what you got. If you're a company that does line of business applications, and you have somebody who never touched those kind of systems, but only worked on websites again, that's where you will find out, because they will not be able to show you those samples from previous projects. And this is my last slide to get you out of here. How to start establishing something about UX, not only in your team and organization, but also in a development project, is have those people, if you have those UX people already, have them train you and others on what is UX, what's the philosophy, what are the best practices. A lot of UX is about philosophy and processes, but a lot of it is just pure textbook knowledge. Now, granted, there's hardly any good textbooks on UX, but knowing best practices helps everybody. It helps you as a developer as well, because you will be in the position to make your own decisions. Because those UX people, no UX person, can define and spec a complete product to all levels of granularity. Carry out usability tests. Again, we said usability testing is something that is comparatively easy and really brings back good results. So consider doing that. Establish quality gates. So if you just do usability testing for the sake of it, it's like, oh, now I have the result and yeah, we have some problems. That's fine. But if you map that to metrics and say, for example, we have a standardized UX survey that we have people to rate their experience with after they experienced a prototype, for example. And we say a quality gate is on a scale from 1 to 10 on different dimensions of UX. We always want to be on a 7 or higher. That is interesting because that gives you a clear goal. It allows you to trace over the time how your practice of UX has evolved. So that's a very good thing to do. Exemplify user-centered design with lighthouse projects. Yeah, you basically say, if it's the first time we use UX in our organization, I pick a project that has sufficient complexity where you say, well, we believe that UX can contribute something here, and a project that has enough exposure up and down to management level and to the co-workers that say it's a really important project. so that enough people actually look at this and actually can see the impact, hopefully the positive impact that the UX people brought in with that Lighthouse project. And then the last one here, as soon as possible, try to come up with the standards and come up with documentation and approaches to make things more consistent. And standards, not only talking about measuring standards, like what is good UX for us and what not. Do we want to be on a 7 or on an 8 in average on those surveys, for example, but also standards as in alignment standards and typography standards, these kind of things that you don't have to reinvent every single time from scratch. You can work with your marketing people and your branding people that also have standards in terms of, for example, corporate colors that you want to use. And this then will help you in the next round for the next project and for the next product to get up to steam faster because you already have some base definitions handy. And that was all I wanted to convey to you. Thank you very much for staying. And any more questions? Okay, then thank you very much. Enjoy your night.